The house looked exactly as she remembered it, only colder. High ceilings stretched above imported marble floors, chandeliers casting soft golden light across rooms that hadn't changed in 20 years. The kind of home where silence had always been more powerful than conversation, where elegance was weaponized, where everything gleamed but nothing felt warm. It was her father's 70th birthday. They'd flown in guests from London, Paris, and Dubai. The caterers wore black gloves. A string quartet played something baroque from the curved landing above the grand foyer. Champagne flutes stood at rigid attention on a tray by the door. The silver was polished. The linens were crisp. The air smelled like money and expectation. She hadn't been home in 5 years. Not since she left New York without a word, burned out and disillusioned after trying so desperately to make them proud. An Ivy League degree, a job in consulting, a life she thought would finally earn her a seat at the table. But in the end, they didn't ask her to stay. And she didn't beg to be seen. Her invitation to tonight's event came via formal letter, cream-colored envelope, embossed return address. It said, "We would love to have you join us." It was signed not by her father, but by her stepmother, the woman who had always smiled through her teeth and called her passionate, like it was a disease. Still she came, not because she missed them, not because she needed closure, but because something inside her had changed. She'd spent the last 5 years rebuilding her life outside of these walls, quietly, fiercely. A boutique consulting firm in Nairobi, a tech accelerator for female-led startups in Thailand, a fellowship in Geneva. She never posted updates, never bragged. But when she walked through that front door, her spine was straight, her jaw calm, and her eyes no longer searched for approval. She arrived 5 minutes before the program started, right on time, but already late by their standards. The valet took her coat. A waiter nodded politely. The murmur of polished voices swelled from the main dining room like a tide she was no longer expected to navigate. And then there she was, her stepmother, Agnes. Agnes was wearing emerald silk and the kind of pearls that weren't just heirlooms, but inheritance strategies. Her hair was pinned back tight. Her smile never reached her eyes. "Darling," she said, like someone tasting something sour. "You made it." "I did," she replied, calm, even. Agnes didn't step aside, didn't offer a hug, just stood in the threshold of the kitchen, arms folded lightly, like she was protecting sacred ground. "We're short-staffed tonight," she said, with the false cheer of someone offering bad news as a compliment. "The caterers are down too. It's a bit of a mess." She gestured to the tray of champagne flutes on the counter behind her. "Could you be a dear and help with the drinks? You know, your father prefers not to wait." For a moment, everything stilled. The sound of forks on china in the distance, the clink of a wine bottle uncorking, the laugh of someone important echoing down the hall. She said nothing. Her fingers twitched once at her side. She could have walked out, could have said no, could have thrown the tray on the floor and watched the glass shatter like her old self. But she didn't. She stepped into the kitchen, picked up the tray, balanced it with a grace that came from years of carrying burdens she never spoke about. "Of course," she said. Agnes blinked slightly, caught off guard. "Wonderful." She didn't smile. She didn't need to. As she turned toward the dining room, the weight of the tray steadied her. There were 12 glasses, 10 guests, 2 spares. The champagne sparkled like something sacred. Her heels clicked against the marble, each step a quiet refusal to be shaken. She walked into the celebration like a ghost returning to haunt a home that never missed her. Her father laughed from the head of the table, his voice booming with pride over a story she wasn't in. His second wife stood beside him, beaming with ownership. No one noticed her at first, and then they did. Their eyes flicked over her, confused, amused, dismissive. She was just the girl with the tray, but she saw them, all of them. The cousins who whispered she was too much. The uncle who told her father he should have sent her to finishing school, not Princeton. The woman from Boston who once said, "She'll grow out of it like ambition was a stain." She paused behind her father's chair. He turned. For half a breath, something in his eyes flickered. Recognition, surprise. But she didn't give him time to speak. She handed him a glass, nodded politely, and moved on, leaving nothing behind but the scent of lilac and the echo of everything she never said. She wasn't here for a seat at the table anymore. She was here to remember why she'd left in the first place. And as she moved through the room, champagne in hand, head high, the ghosts of her past whispering just behind her eyes, she realized the tray they handed her wasn't an insult. It was a test. And she passed it without spilling a single drop. She grew up in a house where the monograms mattered more than the conversation. Tucked behind manicured hedges in suburban D.C., the home was 3 stories of Southern heritage preserved in marble oil portraits and silence. There were rules for everything from which fork to use with oysters to how loud a woman could laugh in mixed company. Rules that stitched together a family name steeped in tradition and old money, the kind that whispered rather than bragged. She was the second daughter in a family where the first daughter was already a legacy. Caroline the golden child. Graceful, obedient class president 3 years running and married by 25 to the son of a Virginia senator. Her wedding had been written up in Southern living. Her pearls were real. Her smile was practiced. She said things like "Daddy knows best" without irony. She never challenged, only charmed. And she was rewarded for it, constantly. Our narrator, she was different. Even as a child, she asked the questions that made adults stiffen in their chairs. She was curious and unfiltered, with a love for policy and poetry, not polo matches. While Caroline sat poised at cotillion, she hid under staircases reading James Baldwin and circling phrases in the Atlantic. She knew the names of every Supreme Court justice before she turned 13. She could recite Audre Lorde and explain why D.C. statehood mattered. And she never, ever learned how to be silent just to make others comfortable. Her father didn't quite know what to do with her. He was a man made of posture and applause, a commanding presence, charming and public, magnetic, in rooms that mattered but emotionally withholding behind closed doors. In front of donors and senators, he introduced her as the spirited one. In private, he asked her to lower her tone and mind her place. He preferred daughters who obeyed, not ones who questioned the dinner guests' voting record. The first break came the day she declined her acceptance to Harvard Law. It was the dream her father had bragged about to his golf buddies since she was in middle school. But when the letter arrived, she folded it neatly and placed it in her drawer. Instead, she chose Teach for America. She didn't tell them until the night before her departure. They were finishing dessert in the garden candlelight, flickering against crystal servers moving like shadows. Her mother had just asked which apartment she'd chosen in Cambridge. "I'm not going to Harvard," she said, voice calm. "I'm moving to Baton Rouge. I've accepted a placement with Teach for America." The silence was immediate. Her father's spoon clinked against his dish. Her mother blinked once, then looked down at the linen tablecloth. Caroline gave a small, startled laugh, thinking it was a joke. But it wasn't. "You turned down Harvard," her father repeated slowly, as if saying it aloud might make it untrue. "Yes, to teach in where? Baton Rouge. Low-income school. 6th grade. His voice didn't rise. That wasn't his style. Instead, it went cold. Precise. "You're going to throw away your future on some idealistic crusade." She held his gaze. "No, I'm going to teach. Because someone should." He pushed back from the table without another word. From that moment on, something inside the family shifted, and it never shifted back. At first, it was subtle. Family emails left her off group threads. Holiday plans were suddenly made without consulting her schedule. Her father's annual Christmas letters went from Caroline and her brilliant sister to just Caroline and her growing family. Then it turned overt. When she wrote an op-ed on public school funding disparities for a national magazine, her father's name came up once in the byline's bio, simply as daughter of prominent business leader. No accusations, no family dirt, just facts. He called her the next morning. "You've embarrassed us. I've told the truth. You've made yourself political. I've made myself useful." His silence hit harder than any shouted insult. He hung up without saying goodbye. At family gatherings, when she did show up, she became the story they rolled their eyes at. Caroline's husband would raise his glass and say things like, "And how's our little activist?" with a smirk. Her mother would smile tightly and whisper, Try not to start anything tonight. But she didn't need to start anything. Her presence was the disruption. And yet, despite it all, despite the disapproval, the absence of acknowledgement, the whispered judgments, she kept going. She taught those sixth graders in Louisiana. And when the school lost its funding, she helped write the grant that kept it open. She went on to earn her master's in public policy quietly online while working 2 jobs. She joined a think tank focused on education reform. She spoke on panels where no one cared whose daughter she was, only that she knew her data, her history, and how to change lives. Still in that house in Virginia, none of it counted. To them, she had wasted her Ivy League education. She was too bold, too public, too unfiltered. She didn't fall in line, didn't marry well, didn't behave. She was the daughter who didn't obey. And to a family like hers, there was no greater sin than that. She left Virginia with 1 suitcase, a folded letter of acceptance to teach for America, and silence in her throat. There was no dramatic exit, no slammed doors or final arguments. Just a quiet departure from a house that had long since stopped feeling like home. Her first stop was Baltimore. A shared apartment with 2 other teachers, the sound of sirens like a lullaby in the distance, and mornings that began with broken copy machines and students who arrived hungry. She learned more in those first 6 months than she had in 4 years of Ivy League lectures. Not just about education, but about grit, about urgency, about how much could be done with so little. Then came Detroit, a city that felt like it had been bruised but not broken. She took a job teaching civics at a high school with no heat in the gym and cracked linoleum in the halls. Her classroom had 1 functioning window and 32 students. Most had seen more loss by 16 than she had in a lifetime. But they showed up, so she did too. During the day she taught. At night she studied. She enrolled in a graduate program in public policy, attending online seminars from a secondhand laptop, her textbooks marked up with red ink and old highlighter. She worked part-time at a diner near Eastern Market on weekends, pouring coffee for construction workers and night nurses. No one there knew her last name. No one cared about her lineage. They just knew she showed up. She started a nonprofit in her 3rd year in Detroit quietly, without fanfare or a press release. It focused on transitional housing for single mothers. Nothing glamorous, just dignity. Laundry machines that worked, rent structures they could actually afford, on-site childcare that didn't treat them like burdens. She didn't post about it online. She didn't chase awards or try to go viral. Impact was the goal, not attention. And still the work began to ripple. City workers started forwarding her name when other neighborhoods asked for help. She was invited to join a community redevelopment board, then elected chair without campaigning. People listened when she spoke, not because she shouted, but because she didn't. Her personal life grew the same way, quietly, meaningfully. She met Michael at a zoning hearing. He was a civil engineer proposing safer sidewalk routes for kids near a freeway underpass. She liked that he brought homemade coffee in a thermos and took handwritten notes in the margins of his blueprints. They talked first about funding, then about music, then about growing up in houses where no one said, "I'm proud of you" out loud. They married at City Hall, no bridal party, no published announcement in the Times. Just them 2 close friends as witnesses, and a handwritten vow that ended with, "You see me, I stay." They bought a modest brick house with overgrown ivy on the porch and a basement full of spiders. She planted wildflowers in the backyard and painted the kitchen herself. They lived simply but fully. No gold frames, no silver spoons, just shared meals inside Joe's and Friday nights where they read the paper side by side in silence. It wasn't perfect. Some nights she cried after school board meetings when funding got cut or a teen she loved ended up in juvenile court. Some months the nonprofit's rent was a question mark. And every so often a letter would arrive from Virginia, a birthday card, unsigned, a family newsletter with her name still missing. She didn't send anything back. But she didn't let it break her either. She kept going. When her name was first floated for city council, she laughed, said she wasn't a politician. But the mothers she worked with, they weren't joking. "You already fight for us," they said. "Might as well have the badge." She didn't run a flashy campaign, no attack ads, no yard signs, Just a few community town halls, one pamphlet that listed her values, and a promise she'd keep answering her own emails. She won by a margin no one expected. As a councilwoman, she stayed who she was, early to meetings, late, to leave never taking the microphone, unless she had something that mattered to say. She didn't posture. She didn't compromise on the things that counted. She redirected budget funds towards school nurses and food programs, even when it made enemies. Especially when it made enemies. Her inbox grew, so did the press coverage. For once, she didn't shrink. And then one afternoon she was approached by two women from the state assembly. They had followed her work, quietly, closely. "Ever considered running for state office?" one of them asked, handing her a folder of preliminary paperwork. She looked at the name typed neatly on the line. Candidate, her name. She didn't answer right away. She thought of her father's words, how he said she had wasted her Ivy League education. She thought of that night in the garden when he'd pushed back from the table like her choices had personally offended him. And then she thought of the housing units that now stood where an abandoned lot once rotted. The teenage girls who now walked to school without fear. The mothers who wrote her thank you notes with stick figure hearts from their kids at the bottom. She hadn't built the life her family expected. She'd built something better. A life with meaning, with movement, with roots in places that had once been ignored, without applause, without pedigree, but built piece by her own hands. And that was enough. It arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, thick ivory cardstock tucked inside an envelope with navy edging and wax seal. Her name was handwritten in perfect cursive, not her father's bold slant, but her stepmother's looping practiced script. She stared at it for several minutes before opening it. Inside, a formal font announced, "You are cordially invited to celebrate the 70th birthday of Mr. Harrison Langston, Saturday, 6:00 p.m. Formal attire. Langston Estate, Alexandria, VA." At the bottom in smaller script, the part that mattered, "We'd love to see you. Let's put the past behind us. Eloise." There was no mention of apologies, no acknowledgement of the 5 years of silence. No reference to the time she had shown up to her sister's engagement party and been mistaken for the hired help. Just, "Let's put the past behind us." She turned the invitation over in her hands. Ivory and navy. Understated expensive. Nothing had changed. Her husband found her at the kitchen counter, still holding it. He glanced at the card, then at her face. "Are you going to go?" he asked gently. She didn't answer right away. They talked that night over takeout Thai food and soft jazz humming from the radio. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. Just laid it out piece by piece. "I don't want to be a symbol. I don't want to be a cautionary tale or some redemption arc they can point to." He nodded, letting her finish. "Maybe it's not about them," he said quietly, setting down his fork. "Maybe it's just about walking into the room and knowing you don't owe them anything. Maybe that's what closure is." The word clung to her ribs, closure. She didn't sleep much that night. Instead, she paced the hallway, pausing at the photographs that lined their walls, images of her with students, community events, local moms in front of ribbon-cut housing projects. Moments full of presence, not performance. She wasn't afraid of them. Not anymore. But she was wary of what they represented. Curated memory, selective pride, and the deep ache of being edited out. Still, Saturday morning came. She chose a dress in deep slate blue, elegant but unassuming, a soft drape at the waist sleeves to the elbow neckline modest. Her wedding band glinted softly against her skin as she adjusted her earrings, small pearls, nothing showy. She didn't bring flowers, she didn't bring wine, she didn't even bring her husband. He offered, of course. But she had shaken her head. "I need to walk in alone," she said. And he'd kissed her forehead. "I'll be here when you get back." The drive to Alexandria was quiet. Trees lined the highway spring, just beginning to wake in the branches. Her hands stayed steady on the wheel, though her chest thudded with an old rhythm recognition laced with grief. The Langston estate was exactly as she remembered. Ivy wrapped around white columns, gardenias blooming in the manicured hedges. A valet waiting at the driveway who blinked twice before recognizing her name. She stepped into the foyer and was hit by the scent of lemon wax and polished silver. The chandeliers glittered above. Everything was immaculate. Inside, laughter floated through the air. Her father's booming baritone, her sister's polite soprano, the clink of glasses and the rustle of linen. And then, "Darling, you made it!" Eloise stood at the foot of the staircase, champagne in hand, lips painted in her signature mauve. She wore a navy sheath dress and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We weren't sure you'd come," she said with a light chuckle, already half turning toward the dining room. She paused, glanced over her shoulder. "The caterers are running behind, and the servers are too short. Would you mind helping with the drinks, dear?" It wasn't a question. It wasn't even cruel. It was worse, casual. She stood still for a beat too long. She could have said no, could have walked out, heels clicking sharply across the marble, could have made a scene, tossed the tray back into Eloise's manicured hands. But she didn't. She looked her stepmother in the eye, smiled softly, and said, "Of course." She picked up the tray, gleaming silver, lined with flutes of champagne that trembled faintly with each step, and walked toward the party. She didn't shake. She didn't sweat. Her shoulders were square, her chin steady, and in her eyes the full weight of a life built without apology. As she stepped into the ballroom, the past curled around her like smoke. Familiar faces blinked in confusion, unsure how to place her. But she didn't look away. She moved among them, graceful, composed, with the ghosts of every rejection and every small cruelty whispering behind her calm gaze. She was not there to serve. She was there to be seen. The house was unchanged. White columns framed the entryway. The front lawn trimmed like it had been sculpted, not mowed. Spotlights lit the facade like a museum exhibit, Langston Legacy 70 Years of Strength. Inside, the scent was almost aggressive, jasmine candles, polished wood, and something sweet from the kitchen that didn't smell homemade. She stepped into the foyer in her slate blue dress, her heels echoing on marble floors that had never felt welcoming. No one rushed to greet her. Instead, a distant burst of laughter pulled her attention toward the ballroom where her father stood center stage, whiskey in hand, surrounded by a semicircle of suits and pearls. He looked like a man born to host, charming a mayor with a hand on his shoulder, and nodding to a Wall Street name she half recognized from the financial pages. He hadn't changed. But maybe she had. Eloise appeared at her elbow, all perfume and precision, her voice thin and tight. "Oh, good, you made it. We were wondering." Not a hug. Not even a hello. Just that look, that polite smile with edges. "You remember where everything is. Could you be a dear and take this in?" She turned, and there it was, a silver tray. On it, flutes of champagne gently fizzing. A silence stretched between them. It could have snapped. It could have exploded. But she only blinked once, then smiled softly. "Of course I can." And she took it. Because some wars aren't fought with fury. They're fought with stillness. She walked into the party with the tray balanced steady, like it was nothing new. Because it wasn't. She had carried harder things, invisible things. The weight of rejection, of exile, of being the daughter who didn't behave the way daughters were expected to. In the corner, a string quartet played something elegant and forgettable. The ballroom was glowing chandeliers, gold-rimmed place settings, white roses coiled around crystal vases. A banner hung above the head table, in calligraphy, legacy, and leadership, honoring Harrison Langston. She scanned the seating chart. No card with her name. Not on the family table. Not on any table. She passed a pair of donors discussing property tax loopholes. Another woman whispered to her companion, "Isn't that the one who—" What was it? The teacher. She wasn't wearing the right kind of story. Her sister spotted her near the edge of the crowd. "Hey, look at you," she said, voice high with something too close to surprise. Her gown was designer, her teeth professionally whitened. Her arm looped around the elbow of her husband, the senator's son. "We weren't sure you'd come," she said. There it was again, the refrain. Her smile tightened. "It's a special night." "Right, Dad's so happy. He really wanted this to be about legacy. Generational leadership, you know." The words landed sharp. They always had a way of doing that, talking about values like currency, measuring worth by inheritance and proximity to power. She watched as guests rotated in and out of orbit around her father. A handshake here, a photo there, the occasional toast that always mentioned family, but never all of it. Eloise returned later this time with a clipboard. "Darling, the servers are still backed up. Mind helping in the study with the bourbon set? We just need an extra hand for a bit." She nodded, not because she had to, but because she knew now this wasn't about obedience. This was about clarity. She stepped into the study, the walls lined with oil paintings of Langston men in tailored suits, books arranged by color. A fire crackled neatly. The glasses were already laid out. She poured with precision, calm. When she re-entered the ballroom, the lights had dimmed. A microphone crackled. Her father stood before the crowd, arms wide. "Thank you all for coming. Tonight isn't about me. It's about what we build, what we leave behind. Legacy isn't just money or real estate, it's reputation. It's discipline. It's honor." A hum of agreement swept the room. She stood at the far end now near the double doors, tray in hand. No one saw her, or so they thought. But from where she stood, she could see everything. The way her sister's smile faltered when their father thanked everyone at the table except her. The way Eloise beamed with each name drop. The way the guests clapped like legacy was a performance they were all in on. And she stood there, still the bubbles in the champagne flutes catching the light. If anyone had asked, she would have told them legacy doesn't start in rooms like this. It starts in city council meetings at 800 a.m., in housing plans, scribbled in the margins of notebooks, in midnight texts from single moms wondering if rent assistance will arrive. It starts where no one's looking. The tray didn't shake in her hands. She didn't cry. She didn't interrupt. She just watched. A storm silent in its center. And when someone finally reached for a glass, someone important, someone she recognized from the news, he looked at her and said, "Thank you." She met his eyes steady. "You're welcome." She wasn't there to serve. But if they insisted on handing her a tray, she'd carry it like a crown. The stemware didn't clink. She made sure of that. The tray balanced easily between her hands, centered stable exactly the way she had trained her voice to sound over years of walking into rooms where no one expected her to belong. She moved through the crowd like smoke, quiet and unnoticed. Around her, conversations fluttered and rose like the violin playing in the corner, elegant, meaningless, and perfectly rehearsed. To her left, a man in a bow tie whispered something about tax incentives in coastal real estate. To her right, two women compared the florists they had flown in for their daughters' weddings. And there she was, slipping between silk and sequins, holding 6 champagne flutes, like they were sacred. A voice stopped her, light amused. "Oh, are you new? You must be from a service. What a lovely touch." She turned. "Aunt Ruth." The woman blinked again. It took a moment, maybe longer. "Oh," she said. "Oh my goodness, you look so different." "Yes, well, it's been so long, darling. You've been..." "Where again?" She could have said Baltimore, Detroit, the State House, the neighborhoods where your name doesn't open doors but your presence opens hearts. But instead she just smiled, offered a flute, and said, "Busy." Aunt Ruth took the champagne and drifted away like it had been a transaction. She moved again, slower this time, through the same room she used to play piano in as a child. Her feet knew the layout by heart, the Persian rug under the grand piano, the dent in the molding where her sister once tripped in kitten heels, the corner where she used to sit and read during grown-up dinners. That piano. She could still hear the memory of herself at it, her small fingers on the keys, practicing Debussy while being told, "Don't play anything too loud. The guests are arriving." She had muted herself early. In the corner now, her father was beaming. His voice carried over the hum of conversation. "And of course we're so proud of Elizabeth's recent gala. Raised nearly $250,000 in one night. Just astonishing." Applause followed, brief, polite. Her sister did a humble wave with the kind of practiced charm that could win votes and favors. No one noticed her nearby. No one said, "And here's my other daughter." She could have tapped the glass, made a toast, declared something like, "I raised half a city block from the ground. I've rewritten housing codes, passed legislation, sat at tables where real power is brokered." But what would be the point? None of them were listening. Not really. Not to the girl who didn't post vacation pictures. Not to the daughter who never fit the frame. Not to the woman who chose substance over spectacle. As she turned, another guest brushed past her, muttering a distracted thanks as he took a glass. She felt no anger, only a dull, ancient ache. The kind that doesn't flare anymore. The kind that simply hums in your ribs like a song you once knew too well. She wasn't hurt. Not exactly. What she felt was sharper than sadness, but quieter than rage. It was recognition. Recognition that this moment, the tray, the eyes that passed over her, the father who introduced her sister's resume like scripture, this was all so predictable. Pain becomes something else when you see it coming. She looked down at the champagne flutes. 6 left, 1 for the mayor, 1 for the gallery donor, 1 for the woman in the red dress who had once said, "Your politics are charming but impractical." She kept moving. This was the family ballroom, the cathedral of performance, and tonight she was wearing silence like a gown. But beneath it, her spine stayed straight, her hands stayed steady, and her eyes saw everything. By the time she made her way back toward the kitchen, 2 flutes remained. She paused in the archway. From here she could see her father again, laughing, commanding, spinning legacy out of air like a magician with better lighting. Her sister sat beside him, framed perfectly. And her? She took the final flute, lifted it. Not as a toast, but as a promise they would never know the weight of the glasses she carried, or the fire she built from being invisible. The room shifted when he entered, not because of any announcement, but because of the weight of his presence. The governor of the state, flanked by aides, pressed suits, and trailing media, stepped through the grand double doors of her father's estate, late as expected, yet right on time for spectacle. Heads turned. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Even her father's laughter dimmed. She stood quietly at the far end of the room, tray still balanced half the flutes, empty, her spine tall in the borrowed stillness. No one noticed her. Not really. They looked past her, the help, the shadow, the black sheep made invisible, until he saw her. "Excuse me," the governor said, brushing past a donor mid-sentence. He moved swiftly, the crowd parting before him like water. He stopped 3 feet away, took in her face, and without even glancing at the tray in her hands, smiled. "Madam Minister, you didn't tell me you'd be here." The word dropped like a match in a dry room. Minister. A pause. A breath. She said nothing at first, just tilted her head and gave a small, steady smile, the kind people learn to hold when they've carried their lives in silence for too long. Gasps rippled outward from where they stood. "You know each other?" someone whispered. The governor turned to the crowd, now hanging on his every word. "Everyone, I'd like to introduce one of the fiercest housing advocates I've ever met. A woman who went from classroom teaching in Detroit to rewriting affordable housing policy in this state." He gestured broadly with a politician's grace. "A woman who turned down a cabinet appointment to finish the community project she started, and who, whether she likes the spotlight or not, is one of the rising stars of American politics." She didn't blink, didn't flinch. The tray in her hands gleamed under the chandelier. Her stepmother's mouth opened, then shut. Her father, once so quick with words, stood frozen, a champagne flute half raised. Her sister turned away, her face flushing a shade that didn't match her perfect blush. And Olivia. Olivia lifted one eyebrow. "Would you like sparkling or dry?" she asked the governor. He laughed warm and full. "Whichever lets me toast to your legacy." She handed him a glass, her fingers steady, her pulse calm. The cameras started clicking. Aides snapped photos. A nearby reporter whispered, "Get her name." That's the story. She could feel the shift, the new gravity forming around her. She was no longer the forgotten daughter in the wrong dress at the wrong table. She was something else entirely. She excused herself a moment later. No fanfare, no dramatics. But the silence that followed her steps wasn't the same kind that greeted her earlier. This one was reverent. And inside that silence, a truth echoed. They thought she came to beg for space. She came to remind them she didn't need their table because she'd already built her own. The governor's warmth lingered in the room long after he moved on. The crowd, once indifferent, had begun to shift shoulders, squaring voices dropping. She could feel it like a second skin attention. A woman in pearls approached first. "I'm on the board at New Horizons. We'd love to have you speak at our winter summit." A man followed, fumbling with his cufflink. "You're that Olivia, the one with the housing initiative in East Detroit." He extended a card with both hands. "Would love to connect. I think our foundations could align." She accepted each gesture with grace. Not with hunger, not with pride, just with the stillness of someone who had long since stopped needing applause. And then silence again. Her father hadn't moved. He stood 10 feet away, arms crossed, gaze fixed on a far wall. He didn't look at her, didn't speak, didn't so much as nod. He hadn't clapped. Not when the governor praised her, not when the crowd shifted, not when the man who had once called her directionless was proven wrong in front of everyone he'd spent his life trying to impress. Her sister appeared next to her face, taught in practiced civility. "That was unexpected," she said, her voice a shade too high. "I mean, it's great. Of course, you've done well for yourself." Olivia turned to her, the smile never touching her eyes. "Thanks," she said simply. And then came her stepmother. Eyes narrowed, but chin lifted, as if trying to reclaim control of the narrative. "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked, not quite softly. "You could have told us. You let us think you were just—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Olivia held her gaze. "Because it shouldn't take a title for me to be seen." That landed like glass, breaking quietly in the next room. No one spoke. She turned, walked to the edge of the room, and set the tray down on a table draped in linen, still half full with untouched champagne. Then she walked to the window. Outside, the estate grounds stretched in meticulous symmetry. The trees were trimmed. The lawn was pristine. Gardeners had arranged tulips into neat, color-coded beds. Nothing wild, nothing unexpected. Everything controlled. Except her. She stood there in silence, fingers resting against the cold glass, and memory began to unfold behind her eyes. She was 22 the day she left this house. She had packed her car quietly before sunrise. No dramatic fights, no door slamming, just silence. Her father had come downstairs only once, mug in hand, looking more inconvenienced than emotional. "If you're going to run off and waste your potential, at least don't expect us to clean up the mess," he'd said. She hadn't replied. Just stepped outside, the gravel crunching beneath her shoes, the air thick with the scent of gardenia and grief. That ache, that tightness in her chest, that quiet wondering of whether she was making a mistake, had haunted her for years. It echoed through empty studio apartments, through late-night bus rides, through whispered calls to shelters at midnight, asking if they had room for another mother and child. But now she felt it again. Not as pain, as proof. She was still that girl who walked away. But now she carried a truth he couldn't rewrite and a name they couldn't pretend not to know. Behind her, the room began to buzz again. Chatter picked back up. Waiters passed by, glasses clinked. But her father didn't come. And she didn't wait for him to. She didn't say goodbye. No parting hugs, no forced smiles, no second glances. Just a quiet walk to the coat room, the velvet hush of polished floors beneath her heels, and the weightless exhale of choosing her own exit. Outside, the night was cooler than expected. A spring wind drifted through the driveway, ruffling the manicured hedges and tugging gently at the hem of her dress. She stepped into the car, closed the door, and sat still for a moment, hands folded in her lap. Breath, steady gaze, unfixed. Then she pulled out her phone. A single text. "I'm on my way home." Her husband replied almost immediately. "Dinner's waiting. Just you and me." She didn't cry. There was no sudden collapse, no rush of catharsis, just warmth, small, solid, spreading through her chest like a hand pressed gently over her heart. Not from the governor's praise, not from the whispers that had followed her all night, but from knowing someone was waiting, someone who already knew her worth even when no one else had. As the driver pulled away from the estate, Olivia leaned her head against the cool window. The house faded behind her brick by brick until it was just another silhouette in the rear view. That place had once felt like the entire world. Tonight, it was just a building with chandeliers and champagne and people who hadn't really seen her until someone else said her name. She thought about that. A house built on legacy, on lineage, on controlled narratives and carefully arranged seating charts. And yet it was outside of all that: the late nights in Detroit, the dusty basements turned into women's shelters, the untelevised town halls where she had discovered who she really was. She had found herself not through applause, but in the silence that followed hard choices. The irony wasn't lost on her. They had dismissed her as the one who walked away. But walking away had been her greatest inheritance. She pulled out her phone again, this time to call. It rang twice before her campaign manager picked up. "Hey, did you survive the fancy gala?" Olivia smiled faintly. "I did. And I've made my decision." A beat of silence. Then, "You're running?" "I'm running," she said. Calm, certain, for state senate. Not because they finally saw me, but because I did. She could hear the manager's grin on the other end. "That's the best reason I've ever heard." They spoke for a few more minutes, logistics timing, who to bring onto the advisory team. But even as the call ended, Olivia sat there a moment longer, letting the commitment settle in her bones. It didn't feel heavy. It felt true. This next chapter wouldn't be about proving anything. It would be about choosing. And not in reaction to rejection, but in response to her own voice. The road stretched ahead of her, lit by quiet pools of streetlight, and the kind of stillness that only comes after storms have passed. She watched the trees blur by their leaves, beginning to turn with the season. She thought of the women she'd met over the years, the single mothers, the immigrants, the forgotten. All the people who had taught her what leadership really meant. Not legacy, not lineage, but presence, integrity in the dark, courage without an audience, kindness when it wasn't expected. By the time she arrived home, the porch light was glowing warm against the night. Her husband opened the door before she even reached for her keys. "You're early," he said with a grin. "I left before dessert," she replied, stepping into the light. He handed her a bowl of reheated pasta, the kind he always made when he knew she'd be too tired to pretend. They sat on the couch together, legs curled beneath them, no spotlight in sight. Just laughter. The sound of someone pouring a second glass of wine. The weight of real love, undemanding, unposed. And later, when the house was quiet again, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing her hair out of its evening updo. No makeup, no heels, no curated version of herself. Just Olivia. She looked into her own eyes and felt something anchor. Not revenge, not even justice, just peace. "I didn't need to prove anything," she thought, placing her brush down slowly. "But that night, the world saw me, and so did I."